All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today on April 1st, 2020, on Wednesday, to talk about criticisms of the New Deal. The focus of this lesson today is going to be just to point out the different reasons in the 1930s, while the New Deal was in place, that some people didn't like it. This lesson is not to suggest that the New Deal was a bad thing or that the New Deal hurt the United States, just pointing out the criticisms that people had in the 1930s of the New Deal. Before we get into that, a public service announcement to you. Please stop Googling the questions on the activity sheet and then copy pasting the first Google response there. Most of the time, you're not copy pasting the right answer in, and you're certainly wasting your time and my time. If you don't trust the videos to do the work for you, that's fine. You don't trust me to provide this information to you, that's fine. If you want to Google the questions and write in your own responses, you can do that. Just read a couple different websites and write your responses in your own words. And then to wrap up something from last Friday, I noticed today when I was reviewing your classwork, one question that seemed to throw people off was, how did the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, how did that reform the American economy? And basically, it protected people who put money in banks from bank failures. It made it so that if you put money in the bank and that bank failed, you wouldn't lose that money. It restored Americans' confidence in the banking system. It made it so that every single time a bank has failed since the 1930s, since this FDIC was created, that customers didn't lose their money, that they could still go to the bank and take it out if they needed it. And overall, this helped the American economy recover because Americans put money back into banks. Banks started to loan money out to individuals and businesses again, and that helped the economy grow. On to criticisms of the New Deal. So this is the cartoon that you guys were looking at for the Do Now. There are two things to note when figuring out the main idea here. Number one, you've got two people in the top of the page. One guy on the right is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The guy on the left is Harry Hopkins. Hopkins was a close advisor to Roosevelt. He is a person who wanted to create public works programs for the American unemployed, so that they could get jobs. He actually oversaw the WPA and later became Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Commerce. And the conversation they're having here is, as they're riding this thing downhill, how are the brakes on this thing? Roosevelt's concerned that maybe it can't stop, and Hopkins says, what brakes? And of course, the thing they're riding is a giant steamroller ready to flatten anything in its path, and it is labeled New Deal spending. And the criticism here is that the New Deal cost a lot of money and that it was creating a precedent in the United States that the government was going to spend more money than maybe it had or more money than it should. And that's one of the major criticisms of the New Deal that we're going to talk about today, is that the New Deal was just incredibly expensive. It cost $653 billion in today's dollars, which is not the most expensive government program in history, but definitely by far the most expensive government program in history up to the 1930s. Like, the United States government just didn't spend money like it did until the New Deal was created. And that made a lot of Americans in the 1930s concerned that it was too expensive. There was also criticism of New Deal programs like the Agricultural Adjustment Act and the National Recovery Administration. The Agricultural Adjustment Act actually paid farmers to destroy food. Millions of cows, millions of pigs were actually bought by the government and then killed. Farmers in North Carolina were paid over $10 million to plow over or plow under their crops instead of harvesting them and then selling them at market. And the reason the government encouraged farmers to do these things and paid them to destroy animals and crops was because they wanted to lower the supply to raise the prices of farm goods to make farms more profitable. The National Recovery Administration actually created codes for businesses to follow. These codes regulated all kinds of things like minimum wages, maximum prices, the total amount of a product or good that could be produced and sold. They set quality control standards that businesses had to meet to sell products. Both of these programs were actually ruled unconstitutional because they gave the federal government too much power. especially in regulating things that it wasn't supposed to be regulating. The Supreme Court said that these were states' issues that the federal government was getting too involved with. In response to some of his New Deal programs being ruled unconstitutional, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was upset and angry. He wanted these programs to be put in place. So he proposed adding as many as 6 Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court. He thought that if he got to pick the 6 Supreme Court justices, he would pick people who did not or who would not overrule his New Deal programs and policies. It received a great deal of criticism because it just kind of looked like Roosevelt was acting like a king, that he was the person trying to get things. He was going to put things in place no matter what, whether it was right or not. This proposal by Roosevelt actually received no support in the United States government at all. No public support, no support from even Democrats in his own party. It did not even come to a vote. But it just highlights the New Deal agencies that were ruled unconstitutional and the court packing scheme. Highlight criticism number 2 is that the New Deal gave the government too much power, that it was making the federal government bigger and stronger than it was ever intended to be. Now, on the other side of the issue, on the other side of the coin, we just saw 2 criticisms of the New Deal doing too much, too expensive, too much power. There were some people in the United States that believed the New Deal didn't do enough. Like Huey Long on the right, he wanted to distribute a universal basic income to every American. He wanted to collect a lot of tax dollars and then just send every American in the United States a check so that they could have money to spend during the New Deal and forever. On the left-hand side is a man named Francis Townsend. Social Security was actually his idea. And when it was implemented, he was actually a little upset because he thought that Social Security payments to people who were retired should be more money than they were getting paid than what they were as part of Roosevelt's Social Security plan. So these were 2 people who wanted the government to actually do more to help people during the Great Depression. And then one of the historical criticisms of the New Deal is that it did not end the Great Depression. I don't know if this is so much a criticism as something we need to cover before we move on to the conclusion of this unit. The New Deal did not end the Great Depression. It was a set of programs that was supposed to end the Great Depression. It did not, though. You'll see even at the end of the New Deal programs being put in place, 1940, 1941, unemployment was still up around 10%, which is as high as it has ever been since the Great Depression. It did not drop into what would be considered like normal or good levels until 1942, when the United States had entered into World War II. And we see that over here in this graph on the right-hand side as well. This is GDP per person measured in the year $2,000. What it's basically showing us is that during the Great Depression, we've got unemployment or GDP very, very low, which is a very bad thing. We can see it start to climb during the New Deal programs being put in place. We see a recession in the middle of the Great Depression, though. We actually see that over here in this spike in unemployment. And then when the United States entered World War II, we see the United States GDP increase. We see United States unemployment decrease. And that's when the United States came out of the Depression. It's when it entered into World War II, or when it became more involved in World War II. And that's not to say that the New Deal wasn't good. I mean, it was. It helped Americans in a time of need. It changed the way that Americans looked at government and the way that the government acts when there are economic crises. Last week, Congress and the President agreed to a stimulus bill to help the United States economy during this coronavirus epidemic in the United States. And that is a direct result, or it's a precedent. The government acting that way is in part because of the precedent set by the New Deal in the 1930s. A lot of New Deal programs still exist today that help the American economy, like the FDIC, like Social Security, like the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Board to protect workers and workers' rights. So the New Deal was definitely a very helpful very helpful to the American economy and to the American people during the Great Depression. But it would be wrong to say that it ended the Great Depression. And I think it's probably most important today for us to look at the way people experienced the New Deal during the 1930s. So you guys are going to open up in your note page. We'll have your video link up here at the top in a moment. You're going to answer these 6 questions based on the video that you're watching now, and then you're going to open up this folder. You're going to choose any 2 of these letters here that are going to pop up, and you are just going to read the letter and then identify the point of view or perspective of the person who wrote the letter about the New Deal. These are all samples of letters written to people in the Roosevelt administration about the New Deal and the programs that it created. All right, that's going to do it for today. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Have a great day. I really appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. And thanks for everything that you're doing. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help out, any assistance you need, any things you want me to consider, and I'll see you guys soon.